Welcome to Cheat Sheet Tales, where secrets slip, lies unravel, and the truth always has a twist. Real stories, raw confessions, shocking betrayals. Drop a comment if you've ever caught a red flag too late. Now, let's get into today's tale. My name is Kale Vale. I'm 38, and until 9/12 this morning, I was the lead infrastructure architect at Coronic Systems. For 9 years, I held the systems together, sometimes with code, sometimes with stubbornness, and sometimes with duct tape and 2 hours of sleep. And in 17 minutes, they erased all of it. Your role no longer aligns with our new operational direction. That was the line delivered without emotion by Darren Cormer, our new CEO. He did not even look at me. His eyes stayed fixed on a quarterly growth chart, as if my career was a footnote he had already forgotten. He used the word realignment like it was surgical, clean, strategic. I didn't argue. I didn't remind him that I had written the Chiron Core Diagnostics platform on my own time, or that I'd been the architect behind the Uptime Recovery Framework that saved us $11 million in compliance costs last year. I just stood up. No words, no appeal. I walked out through the East lobby like any vendor on their last day, badge in one hand, laptop in the other. I don't think anyone even noticed I was gone. Well, Belle did. She caught my eye for half a second, but, like everyone else, she said nothing. No one says anything at Coronics anymore. Silence is the only currency left in realignments. By the time I reached the parking garage, my phone had already disconnected from the internal Wi-Fi. The last thing I saw before it did was the blinking draft of a proposal I had spent the last month building. A proposal Coronics would now submit without me. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, not crying, just blank. At some point, I opened my laptop, opened a blank document titled Resume, and just stared at the blinking cursor. Years ago, Coronics was a mess. 21 employees, a broken product pipeline, and every code update had to be deployed manually, tested by hand, and usually broke. Something else in the process. I joined as a contractor because I could fix systems no one else could. I stayed because I made them work. Now I was gone, and no one blinked, except someone had. My inbox lit up. New message. Subject: urgent contract opportunity. Sender: Daniel Thomas, CEO of Altamira Security. I clicked. Miss Vale, I understand you are no longer with Kionix as of today. I would like to discuss a time-sensitive consulting engagement that requires your specific expertise. This matter is confidential. Please call my private line. I sat back, rereading the words. He knew. Within hours, he knew. Someone out there had been watching, and they knew exactly who they were looking for. I hadn't even told my husband yet. I hadn't told my son. But there it was, an open door. Maybe you're hearing this from your office stairwell or in your car on your break. If you've ever sat where I was sitting, feeling invisible in the place you helped build, let me know where you're listening from. And if this feels a little too close to your own story, stick around. I'm not done yet. The cursor blinked at me again, but this time I wasn't stuck, because now I wasn't unemployed. I was activated. And Darren, he had no idea what he just set in motion. I opened the email while the second cup of coffee was still warm. The sender line was short, just a name I recognized from old internal briefings. Daniel Thomas, Altamira Security. He requested a call. No title, no pitch, just a single line about a time-sensitive project and my familiarity with their infrastructure. Requirements. His tone offered no explanation, only expectation. The message had been waiting for hours. He must have known almost immediately. I checked the time, closed the lid, and sat back. The kitchen was silent. The same cursor blinked on the screen beside me. Still no updates to my resume. Still no words. When I called, the voice on the other end greeted me without hesitation. He spoke clearly, directly. Their evaluation team had reviewed several proposals. One of them reflected a level of architectural fluency that his staff flagged as unmatched. That draft came from my preliminary work before the transition. He explained their position. They planned to decouple the design from the vendor, proceed independently, bring in the original mind, not the original company. He offered me the project, clean contract, independent role, 2 months of work, full design ownership, compensation, far above anything I had seen on paper in 9 years. They preferred precision. I had already demonstrated it. I said I would review the terms. He set a deadline, noon tomorrow. After the call, I walked to the window and watched a delivery van idle in front of a neighbor's driveway. I stayed there until it left. The contract arrived in my inbox by the time I turned around. I scanned it. Once, slow and methodical. The language followed the same pattern as the call. Clear, undiluted, focused on output, not presence. My name stood alone in the authorship line. The offer held no sentiment, no assumptions, only space. Late that afternoon, the messages started coming, first from a private number, then from a contact I had erased the day before. Darren's name reappeared on the screen without effort. The messages referred to alignment, clarification, interest in revisiting prior decisions. One of them mentioned a compensation review pending mutual interest. I placed the phone on the table and left it there. The sun shifted across the counter. A second device lit up with the same message forwarded from another number. The words moved in circles, but the signal was clear. Something had reached him. Not me. Something else. A missing document, a halted process, a line item that no longer connected. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Everything he wanted was already outside his control. The envelope arrived just after 10. No courier knock, no return. Address, only a name on the seal. Kion's Legal. The weight of the paper told me what the content wouldn't say directly. Inside, 4 paragraphs of careful language circling something they hadn't figured out how to say out loud. Concerns, overlap, confidentiality. The final line reminded me of the non-disclosure agreement I signed nearly a decade ago. No claim, no accusation, just pressure dressed as protocol. I read it once and placed it beside the keyboard. I didn't pause my work. The module I was drafting had already taken shape before their letter crossed the threshold. I returned to it like the interruption hadn't happened. That was the message. By midday, Altamira's legal team had the letter. Their response arrived 30 minutes later. Clean and absolute. Proceed as planned. No barrier. I archived both exchanges. No need to respond. No need to signal back. The contract with Alamira stood on its own. Fresh structure, clean logic, new systems, no borrowed diagrams. The code base bore my name, and no one else's. Every line traceable, every endpoint documented, every decision anchored in a method only I used. At Chronix, the NDA had served as a control lever, a way to keep hands in place, minds quiet. Decisions predictable. But the moment I stepped outside their frame, it lost weight. They built their compliance process to contain risk, not to understand it. And I had never worked from risk. I had always worked from knowledge. The difference now is visibility. Darren knew exactly what had slipped out the door. Not hardware, not files, influence, design authority, system memory. The kind that doesn't fit on a drive or inside a document. The kind that leaves when the person who built the whole thing walks away without a word. What shook them wasn't what I might give Altamira. It was what Chronix could no longer rebuild. Without me. I had been the redundancy plan they never documented, the patch they never tracked, the logic path that held when their shortcuts collapsed. That afternoon, I finished the first full design phase, 7 days ahead of the original timeline. I submitted the draft. No cover letter, no comments, just the work. Thomas replied 3 hours later. Short message, request for presentation to Altamira's executive team Friday morning, no additional guidance. I didn't need any. The slides were all ready, forming in my head before I read the time. Chronix had issued a warning. Thomas had responded with clarity, and I was about to return the signal. Not in court, not in writing, on screen where it mattered. The deck was ready by Thursday. 23 slides structured for clarity. No flair, no transitions. Just a system built from first principles. Leaner, faster, harder to compromise. I didn't rehearse. At 6:40 that morning, my phone lit up with a message from Belle. She didn't ask how I was. She sent one sentence. Vincent's office door has been shut for 2 hours. Something broke. I didn't reply. I stared at the message until the screen faded. When the call with Alamira began, I kept my camera off until the last second. Thomas appeared. With 3 others. Legal, operations, strategy. Each one greeted me like I'd been there all along. They didn't need a story. They needed a decision framework they could trust. I walked them through the model. Not as a pitch, not as a defense, as instruction. Every risk segment tied back to a measurable outcome, every bypass route marked, every vendor plug-in mapped with precision. Not once did anyone mention Coronex, not even Thomas. After the call, I sat in silence. I had returned every piece of leverage they once claimed over me, and not one of them had shown up to stop it. The quiet didn't last. By mid-afternoon, another message came in. Not from Belle this time, a name I hadn't seen in years, Illa Hart, HR. She used to send out promotion templates, birthday lists. Her message now came with no greeting, no signature, just a file, one spreadsheet, no subject line. Tarchimi. Document opened slowly. 16 rows, name, department, hire date, all highlighted in red. The common pattern wasn't poor performance, it was salary. I read the list twice. All of them long-timers, all with critical systems knowledge, all invisible until someone flagged a cost line. The weight of what I was looking at didn't land right away. These weren't colleagues anymore. They were fragments of a plan I had already left behind, but the way they had been grouped said more than any severance letter could. I closed the file, not out of shock, out of certainty. The call with Thomas hadn't changed anything. The cut list was already in motion, and I had stepped out early only because I happened to be the most expensive line on it. Thomas hadn't saved me. Darren hadn't targeted me. The system had executed what it was built to do. That night, I printed the list, not to warn them, not to fix it, just to see their names on paper. 17 in total, including mine. I folded the sheet once and placed it beside the empty laptop box I still hadn't thrown out. Then I opened a blank document and started outlining a structure I hadn't built before. Not for a client, not for a company, for a network. The invite landed just after lunch. No subject beyond a location. Internal conference room, Alamira HQ, 9 a.m. sharp. The organizer wasn't Thomas. It came from strategy, but his name was on. The attendee list, along with 2 others, I had met only once. The 4th name sat quietly at the bottom, Darren Cormer. I read it 3 times. There was no context, no attached file, no explanation. It wasn't a request, it was placement. Someone wanted him in the room. Someone also wanted me to see that. I arrived 10 minutes early. The room was glass on 3 sides. High floor, east-facing. Light moved across the table like a slow searchlight. I laid out my notes in silence. Nothing printed, no laptop, just the structure in my head and the shift in posture from the security team that watched me walk in with a badge that wasn't guest-colored. Tomas entered first. He didn't offer small talk, just a nod. The others followed, and finally, Darren. His jacket was sharp but rumpled near the sleeves. His tie was half a centimeter off center. He took a seat 2 down from me. No greeting. Thomas opened the meeting with a statement about timing, transition, opportunity. For alignment, his tone was neutral, prepared. I watched the edge of the pen in Darren's hand tap once, then stop. Thomas passed the floor to me without introduction. No title, no setup, just space. I stood, walked to the screen, and began. The framework loaded. Quickly, no animations, no visuals, just architecture. A strip system built from function, not language. I walked them through sequence, escalation paths, rollback conditions, external threat modeling. They listened. No one took notes. No one interrupted. The final slide held no logo, just a heading. Build partner recommendation. I turned to the table. The executive to my left asked the question Thomas had set up 3 meetings earlier. In your assessment, who is best positioned to implement this design, Lyra Systems? I said. They have prior experience integrating deep stack predictive logic with limited regression latency. Their team understands the architecture instinctively. They're already aligned with the security logic we've defined. I didn't pause. I didn't explain. No one spoke. Not for 5 seconds, maybe 10. Then Thomas closed the screen. That was the decision. The meeting ended without next steps. Darren stayed seated longer than the others. His hands didn't move. I gathered my notes and walked out first. In the hallway, the silence felt like weight redistribution. Not tension, just shift. Back at my workspace, a message waited from Thomas. Simple, you were clear. Thank you. Darren has requested a follow-up. I left it unread for the rest of the day. The day after the meeting, the code base felt lighter. Not easier, just cleaner. The kind of clean that comes after something breaks loose from behind the wall and the pressure resets. I spent the morning refining the predictive logic layer. 3 pathways collapsed into one. Response time dropped 17%. No one asked for the de-optimization. It made the system faster. That was enough. A message came from Thomas's chief technologist around noon. He requested a review of the escalation response matrix. I sent a restructured version 20 minutes later. He forwarded it to operations without comment. That night, a director I had never spoken to submitted a formal request to schedule an integration roadmap workshop led by me. No title, no approval chain, just a line. We'd prefer she guide the scope directly. They had stopped calling me the contractor. I had become the name attached to the outcome. That same evening, a message landed from someone else entirely. Bernard? Lee, External Relations. He requested a private call, not video, voice only, 15 minutes. He didn't introduce himself. He thanked me for my time. Then he explained that several board members at Altamira had requested a risk review of all current, external vendor dependencies. Coronix was the first file on the table. He asked a question, not legal, not political, practical. Would you consider leading a long-term security strategy track for us, independent of Coronix's involvement? I answered with the one question he expected. Does that change the current engagement terms? No, he said. It adds a second layer. The call ended without commitment. I left the light on at my desk until after midnight, not thinking, just moving. By morning, the architecture file had doubled in complexity. Not mess, just depth. The kind of depth that can't be outsourced without explanation. And explanation needs presence. Mid-morning, I received a forwarded string from someone inside Coronix. Subject line, Escalation Chambers Opportunity. The thread stretched 12 replies long. Legal, compliance, strategy, all pulling in different directions. They weren't writing to me, but they were writing about me. At the center of the thread sat one sentence: we no longer have internal alignment on the technical narrative. Kale's absence continues to create contradictions across documentation. That was their problem. Now I had built the system once. This time I was building it without translation. By late afternoon, Alamira's CTO requested an on-site session for stakeholder alignment. Full executive group, optional attendance, but my name appeared in bold. The title, Owner, Kale Vale. The internal memo from Coronix leaked 2 days later, not through press, through procurement. A vendor query had flagged inconsistency in project naming conventions. One file carried the Chambers tag with a reference line, initial framework adapted from AV. The abbreviation made it sound procedural, but anyone who had touched the core system knew what those 2 letters meant. By noon, 3 department heads had sent clarifying requests to legal. One reply came back. External attribution still under review. That line moved faster than the code ever had. I watched the thread unfold. From a distance, my screen stayed on the Chambers model. The diagrams held no names, no notes, only function. Thomas called a sync session that afternoon. No agenda, just one prompt. project continuity and attribution alignment. His assistant added my name to the calendar without asking. When the meeting started, the faces in the room looked familiar. Not from introductions, from silence. People who had watched me leave Coronix without speaking. People who had said nothing at the time, but now tilted slightly forward as I appeared on screen. Thomas asked one question. Can you walk us through which elements originated before vendor proposals were submitted? I didn't pause. I explained. The early decisions, the integration path, the encryption logic, the rollback protection that hadn't existed in the version submitted after I left. No one interrupted. No one disputed. The room stayed quiet long after I stopped speaking. Then Thomas nodded once and closed the call. No resolution, just record. The next day, someone updated the project log. Version history locked with full authorship credit. My name at the base layer. I didn't request it. I didn't respond. Back at Coronix, Darren convened a town hall. His assistant framed it as a strategic recalibration. The live stream ran for 47 minutes. His voice remained steady through most of it, until a slide appeared, with the current system's architecture map. The version mirrored mine exactly. Someone had copied the logic or tried to, but without the build path, it failed the integration test. That portion of the stream cut briefly. When the video resumed, the slide was gone. I received 3 messages that night from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Each of them attached a screenshot. Each image showed the same thing, a header from the internal resource library last edited by Cale Vale. I didn't reply to any of them. The next morning, the first headline appeared. Kayaks faces attribution dispute after key resignations. No quotes, no comment. Just a photo of the company's lobby and a caption that carried no emotion. Technical leadership under pressure following internal confusion over authorship. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a crisis. It was something colder. A story with no villain, no hero, just a gap they couldn't close. The invite arrived with high importance. Subject line in all caps. Attendees, Coronix Board, Altamira Executive Group, External Compliance. Observers. My name appeared twice, once as participant, once in the footer. Attribution clarification and continuity impact. I declined without writing a reason. No one followed up. That Friday, the meeting took place on the 28th floor of the Altamira building. Frosted glass, dual projectors, printed nameplates on a polished wood table. I knew the room. I had sketched out half the recovery model for the Chambers project while sitting in that same chair 3 weeks before. This time I let someone else sit there. Thomas opened with a timeline, not to explain decisions, only to place them in order. The first slide showed the original system schematic. Not mine, not theirs, just a wireframe with logic that no one in the room could explain without looking down at their notes. When he asked Coronix's team to speak to the evolution path, no. One moved. Darren leaned forward, gestured toward a chart, mentioned key contributors. The names came slowly, carefully. Mine wasn't one of them. Then a hand from legal paused him. A question was raised about the encryption sequence logic, why it differed from what Kayaks had submitted 2 quarters ago. Thomas didn't speak. Someone from Altamira's side answered, that logic belongs to Cale. It's in the initial trace file, submitted before the contract was reassigned. There was no silence, only stillness. Still enough to feel how far the distance had grown between Darren and the table. I watched the room from my laptop at home. No sound, no commentary, just the slow movement of faces as control left one side and settled without force on the other. By the time the final slide appeared, the decision was already made. Altamira's contract would proceed under revised structure. Nova Technical Solutions, my newly incorporated firm, would lead implementation. Coronix would provide legacy support only, under advisory terms. Darren's name didn't appear anywhere on the closing slide. That night, I received a message from someone still inside. Just a line. He looked directly at your chair when they announced. I didn't answer. There was no need to revisit a room that had already voted with its silence. Nova came together in pieces. No launch video, no mission statement, no handshake photo in front of a banner. The announcement was a changelog, version 0.1, internal only. The first line said created, not founded. The second line listed 17 contributors, all with system IDs, all verified. We didn't pick a CEO, we didn't need one. Leadership wasn't a title. It was velocity, pattern recognition, the ability to hold 3 failure paths in your head and still hear the signal from a fourth. Most of us had worked together before. Some had never spoken more than 5 words at Coronex. But when the environment spun up, no one asked where to begin. They just logged in and started writing. Tomas sent over the contract revisions after the second checkpoint. 3-year term, independent technical authority, all system ownership under Nova, not Altamira. No pre-approval loops, no vendor compliance packages. If the work held, the contract held. We signed in silence. No one asked who would present. No one needed to. The architecture was already being used inside Altamira's sandbox network by the time legal filed the ink. The structure wasn't fast. It was stable. The kind of stable that comes from quiet rooms, slow hours, and people who still believe system. Integrity isn't a buzzword. We worked without friction, without layers, without someone above asking us to re-explain the reason behind what we knew. Altamira rolled out the new architecture update to their executive team at the quarterly briefing. My name didn't appear on the slides. It didn't need to. Half the terms in the documentation only existed because I'd written them 3 years ago, and no one had challenged the logic since. Coronex posted a revised system log that week. They tried to rebrand the failure, called it parallel development, cited timelines, reframed gaps as transitions, but one of their PMs forgot to scrub the export trail. A subheader in the deployment tracker still carried the original metadata. Tag, av.fr aimwork, 83.44. It spread in screenshots, not from press, from inside. A former junior engineer tagged me anonymously. I read it on a lunch break, closed the thread, pushed a patch, no response required. That same day, Darren resigned. The email came from HR, not him. The statement was short. Mr. Cormer has exited his role to pursue new opportunities. It didn't include thanks or history, just 2 lines and a new org chart. His position no longer existed. Nova didn't mark the moment. We didn't need to. That Friday, we opened our first physical space. 1 room, 6 chairs, 4 screens, an access list of 20 names, and a sliding door that reset every 12 hours. On the whiteboard in the far corner, someone had written a line in red marker. We didn't plan it. No one claimed it, but no one touched it either. It read, "You can't overwrite what was built into the structure." We left it there. 6 months passed. Nova stabilized into rhythm. Not fast, not loud, just deliberate. Enough work to fill the calendar, not enough to flood it. Clients came through reference, not campaign. Systems built themselves through shared memory. No onboarding manual, no hierarchy. No one asked who owned what. We just built. The chamber system went live on a Monday. Altamira held a short review. Internal, private, no press. Their CTO walked through the final infrastructure map, then passed the floor to the security lead. She pulled up the failover diagram. At the bottom corner, 1 field labeled source author. It wasn't visible to the room, just to her. But she read it out loud. Vale.arch Gen 1. No one said anything. The log remained untouched. Weeks later, another firm requested access to the Nova documentation framework. Not a client, not even a lead, just someone who had heard that our systems didn't break under load. Their question wasn't about pricing, it was about language. Is this the same structure Vale built at Coronex? The answer came from a team member, who had never worked with me before, Chambers. She typed 2 words, it evolved. That was enough. Coronex never addressed the system again. They published no rebuttal. Their architecture file was quietly retired into long-term archival. The final edit on record belonged to a junior associate who hadn't stayed past his first quarter. The page hadn't changed since. My name was still buried in the Comet history. Never asked Altamira for formal recognition. Tomas never offered. It didn't matter. The system outlasted the naming ceremony. The work had already moved on. Jalen asked me once during a late dinner if I missed the people from before. I didn't answer right away. I thought about the faces that looked past me as I packed my things that morning, the silence in the room, the ones who stayed seated while I walked out. He took my pause as a no, changed the subject. I let him. We ate on the balcony that night. No screens, just air. Nova didn't grow fast, but it stayed clean. People, then 21, then 23. The systems held, the reputation grew, the logic scaled. We didn't add noise, just results. On the anniversary of my termination, I received no message from Chronics. No apology, no acknowledgement. But that morning, a new client brief arrived from a firm I hadn't heard of. Their CTO had worked under Tomas a decade ago. The final line of the brief was short. "We're looking for a Veil-compliant build. That to you," was all. They erased my name. They erased my